Well, welcome back, everybody. I'm very privileged to have Dr. McCullough again. Thank you for being here for the second part of our interview. The first part got a lot of attention, and I'm very excited to jump right into it. So, we're meeting today after some very historic news. Last time we spoke, you and I discussed hoaxes and the mendacity on both the left and the right concerning two crises, climate change and the border. Now,
Mm.
with the news about an assassination attempt on Trump's life, what do you make of what just happened? And specifically, how do you make sense of this event in light of the election of COVID-19 and what appears to be global efforts to concentrate vast power?
The historical context of this is amazing. Now, we are, a month after just a disastrous debate performance by Biden, who every day appears to be deeper into what appears to be a combination of a cognitive decline, but also a motor abnormality. And I can tell you as a doctor, it's good that part of this interview is going to be my wheelhouse as a doctor, that combination of both Alzheimer's and Parkinson's together, there is a natural diagnosis called Lewy body dementia. I don't think Biden has that. That's a vicious dementia. People progress rapidly. Every Lewy body patient I've had has been in a wheelchair. It's ravaging. People don't live less than a year. He has a combination of both Alzheimer's and a motor disorder. And looking back on it, he's had two, brain surgeries, two craniotomies for aneurysm. He had a ruptured aneurysm in 1998. There are now data published that once people have had the cranium open and they've had neurosurgery, even years later, they develop cognitive decline from that. He's has chronic atrial fibrillation, little micro strokes from that, even despite taking blood thinners, can take away neurologic function. And then he's actually had 6 COVID-19 vaccines publicly disclosed. And now a very big study out of Korea by Rowe and colleagues showing the vaccines clearly cause an Alzheimer-like syndrome in some patients who've taken the vaccine. And then finally, he's got sleep apnea. And sleep apnea itself with low oxygen at night also contributes to the development of cognitive decline. On the motor side, his presidential report by Dr. Kevin O'Connor, February 28th of 2024, indicates that he actually had a big evaluation for this. He had a big team of people who evaluated him. He's got total body stiffness. He doesn't have an exact diagnosis now. In that team was mentioned a Parkinson's expert. What he has is not classic for Parkinson's, although he's taking small steps. He's kind of moving in block. His face has become masked. His voice has become weak. So as we sit here today, I think he's got, a burden of neurologic disease or neurodegenerative disease that's essentially rendered him incompetent for the job. And you hear, Democrats, Republicans from all over, close friends, George Clooney. And it's common that he can't see within himself. He doesn't have the insight. What's sad is that his wife can't see it. And she almost went nuts after the debate. I don't know if you saw her screaming, into the camera. So this is the setup where Trump has got a headwind now. I think almost everybody can see Trump essentially being the front runner. The Democrats don't know what to do. They don't have an easy replacement for Biden. The 25th Amendment, which would have to be invoked by Kamala Harris and the 15 cabinet members, would actually make her the vice president. And now the Democrats are so far down this philosophy on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And having her as a Black woman, not only would she finish Biden's term, but she for sure would be the Democratic, nominee. How could they replace her with Tim Kaine, a white guy?
Right.
There's no way. So now they're stuck. So now Trump looks like he's got a clear pathway to the his presidency. He's got the wins in his sails. The lawsuits don't seem to matter. This indictments and even this felony conviction doesn't matter. and he's holding a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, which is not his biggest rally. It's a smaller venue. And then you see the events that unfold with respect to Crooks, a young man who gets on top of a building and he shoots.
And your thoughts about that?
You know, I have spoken twice at CPAC ahead of Trump, literally within a matter of hours, and then just spoke recently at the Libertarians Convention as a keynote ahead of Trump. Let me tell you what, the Secret Service always have protocols. They always scope things out ahead of time. They don't leave anything uncovered. I've watched the Secret Service directly myself. I've watched them integrate with the local law enforcement agency, the local, security people. It's obvious that the spot where a shooter could have eyes on Trump was left open. That was the rooftop of a building about 150 meters away. That was the place.
Right.
That could have been actually, and probably was, the ideal place for a shooter to be left open. So the first obvious question is, why is a local law enforcement officer not on top of that building, or a Secret Service agent? Usually it'd be the local police. I've spoken at major events where they are up on the roof. You look up and you can see all the roofs and you can see them around. No one's up on that roof. That's the first observation. The second observation is this is the first attempted assassination of a president or former president in the era of cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, do we have video footage.
Yeah.
Copious amounts of video footage, firsthand witnesses, and they're all actually agreeing with each other, which is amazing. So this young man, Crooks, apparently takes a ladder, a huge ladder up to the side of the building, and then he crawls up on the building and he does like an army crawl with a rifle. People see him and they engaged local police officers and said, there's a man. At one point in time, a woman starts screaming, he's on the roof, he's crawling forward with a gun. So the local police at that time know that is probably about 4 to 5 minutes before Trump is shot. So there's 4 to 5 minutes for the local police to either get on the roof and neutralize him. They don't do that. There's an AP report that a local officer got on the roof, but no one else saw him. So I can tell you that report is I think, suspect, that everyone saw Crooks doing the army crawl. They have 4 to 5 minutes of contacting each other and then contacting the Secret Service down by Trump and getting Trump off the stage, activating what's called a active shooter protocol. And Pennsylvania actually has an active shooter protocol. You can find it on the website. That's the first thing you do is you notify everybody and you have everybody get down or get into a safe position. And 4 to 5 minutes to do that as everyone's screaming and he's crawling forward. Now there are 2 police officers, what I'll call the counter snipers, on top of a barn behind Trump. They have been alerted either by local police or a citizen. There's a citizen, we call him the redhead. He was on a BBC video. He says that he actually got the attention of those guys too and said, there's somebody on the roof. So the 2 counter snipers are on the roof, standing up with binoculars. That barn may be taller than the building that Crooks was on. So they had to have seen Crooks crawling into position. They set up 2 tripods. In fact, the counter sniper closest to view actually has his rifle. He gets his rifle loaded on the tripod. The other guy sets up his tripod, but makes the decision to just go low and rest his rifle. And so they watch Crooks go into position on their binoculars, and they get sighting of Crooks through their rifle sights. And they still don't get Trump off the stage. Mm-hmm. They still don't message. Now, you could say, listen, let's say the radio communication was out. what would a reasonable counter sniper do who had no radio communication? He'd be waving like crazy down below. They'd be whistling. They would shoot their guns in the air. They would do something to alert the crowd and Trump and security down below that there's an impending assassination attempt. And so the counter sniper who's closest in view, and everyone can watch these films over and over again now, he actually has crooks in his view. He waits for crooks to take 6 shots, including the shot that hits Trump in the ear, the shot that fatally kills the attendee at the event and injures 2 people. He waits for those shots to be done. The sniper then gets off of his sight, looks with his eye to be sure that he's done. He gets back in the sight, and then he takes out Crooks with a single headshot. Okay, then Crooks stays up there for minutes before anybody gets up on the roof. So if a local law enforcement officer was already up on the roof confronting Crooks, he isn't over there right afterwards to kick the gun away and make sure he's dead. There's nobody up there. So people are filming. There's Crooks, there's his dead body, and no one's going up there. And finally, what we see is about 3 people go up at once, much later on. There's another very troublesome video out there. This just broke, Michael. There appears to be a Secret Service agent down below and behind the stage of Trump. Now he's wearing, looks like Secret Service outfits. He's got the standard, Mr. Anderson sunglasses. And there are some people kind of moseying around behind Trump with cameras, and that he actually is crouched down and he says, "Why don't you get out of the way? Get out of the way." He kind of moves these people out of the way. He stays crouched down. Then he gets into a further crouched position, and then bang, bang, bang. There's a clear shot at Trump. The bullets come. And this guy, instead of going up to defend Trump, he actually crouches down in a position and stays down behind. This is all extremely worrisome. Through all of this, no one activates an active shooter situation. In fact, one guy's clearing people out of the way for a clean shot. This is troublesome for an inside job that someone in an agency or Secret Service had co-opted or convinced this young man that maybe he's disaffected, he could be an American hero. If he would come take out the president, he would be rewarded for doing this. And all the time, all they wanted him to do is take out Trump, and then they were going to take out the kid with a headshot so there's no witnesses. To make matters worse, as we learn about Crooks, we're told his cell phone is in Quantico, but they can't get into his cell phone. So now there's this period of time where there's no transparency. And what if his cell phone is full of messages from some intermediary or some government agency or some other collaborator? His social media has been scrubbed. Mm-hmm. So as we sit here today, there is a substantial segment in America, and I tell you, virtually every former Secret Service agent, every military sniper, everybody out there who's opining on this in social media, Michael, is highly suspicious that this was an inside job, that they facilitated Crooks getting up there and doing this. They were planning on taking him out, and they had plenty of opportunity at multiple levels to get Trump off the stage before a shot was ever fired.
You mentioned this idea that this is the first assassination attempt since we've had widespread cell phone usage and, of course, with video cameras. Now, if you contrast this with what happened in 1963 with President Kennedy, and you think about what's going on in preparation for this interview, I was thinking about so much that happens in life. We're a very different nation than we were in the 1960s. We're a very different nation than we were even during 9/11, when most people took the official government line. But now, when we look at things like COVID, we look at the border crisis that you and I talked about last time, look at climate change, I can't help but think, there is been a fracturing of the national psyche, maybe even the global psyche, in this sense. We no longer believe the mainstream media or the legacy media, whatever you're going to talk, whatever word we want to use for it. And everything that occurs right now, I keep thinking to myself this one question: how dumb do they think we are? And I'll give you an example. I don't have cable, but I have young kids, and we watch things like Hulu, and
Mhm.
there are all these commercials. And I look at these commercials because I haven't watched really commercials in about 5 or 10 years, except for if I'm at a hotel and there's cable TV or whatever there. And I
Right.
look at these commercials, so I've been away from commercials, and I think to myself, and I even say it to my kids, and I say, how dumb do they think we are to watch these commercials that are meant to insult our intelligence? Looking at what happened with Trump, looking at what these other crises that we're talking about, it's an insult to our intelligence that we would just take this at face value. Just take this at face value that the Secret Service couldn't take this guy off on the roof. That in the midst of all these people pointing to this as it's occurring in real time, very
Mhm.
different from the JFK assassination, that we're
Mhm.
supposed to believe that things happened the way that they did. And I'll add one more thing, which is I've heard initial reports from CNN who are trying to control the narrative, try to downplay that this
Mhm.
was a shooter attacking Trump, that they were still trying to smear him by saying there was a pop or something like that.
Well, yeah, there's a collage that someone put together of the left-wing media where it said shots fired at Trump rally, loud noises heard, pop, 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 just everything outside of assassination attempt.
Right.
And even on the right-wing media, so I had CNN and Fox going. They said, well, every person they had on, the Secret Service are heroes. Look at they put themselves in the line of fire. Look at they're protecting Trump. We don't know what was in the ear of the Secret Service people, but by the time they stood up and were surrounding Trump, they probably got the all clear. Listen, it's all clear. It's all over with. You guys, the only person who took a risk was Trump. All these other guys are out of the way. In fact, that last guy I mentioned, he's clearing people out of the way. Then he got himself out of the way. For us to be told that, and the narrative will probably be that this is a young, disaffected young person who's got mental problems, and he decided to take out Trump. Listen, that young person, he's not responsible for all these security lapses. That is 4 minutes is way too long a period of time between bystanders screaming there's a shooter on the roof to no one, no local police officer and no Secret Service person, acting like there's an active shooter and getting Trump out of the way. Leaving Trump in harm's way looks at this point in time looks intentional. And I don't see how they're going to possibly defend this. But the first thing they have to say is, listen, our communications between the local police and Secret Service broke down. And even though they may not be on the same communication channel, there's almost always a single person who is a go-between between those two agencies. There's at least one person. There was 4 minutes to message and say, listen, people are concerned. There's a guy crawling on the roof. Let the Secret Service know. It may have been the bystander, the redhead, we call him the redhead, who actually told the counter snipers up on the roof where the guy is, because you can see then they were looking over to try to find him on their binoculars. So listen, they were either tipped off by local police or they're tipped off by the bystanders. But the guys on the roof, for sure, looking down over Trump and the Secret Service down below, should have been notifying the Secret Service down below. There's not a single picture of those guys on the barn looking down over Trump with the Secret Service and showing any concern whatsoever. It looks like they are just following the progression of what may have been a planned move. Is Crooks getting in position? Is he ready? He takes his shots. Let's double check he's taking his shots. Okay, we'll take him out. Michael, this is really, I mean, we are 36 hours afterwards, maybe coming up on 48 hours. There is so much video, and there's just too many bystanders. There's too many witnesses here. This is not going to go down well. You mentioned JFK. Of course, there's books written afterwards, and his nephew Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and all the hypothesis testing and piecing together information that this could have been an inside job of the CIA. And one of the books that I read on this, of Lee Harvey Oswald getting out of a limo in New Orleans with a bunch of CIA guys, ahead of time. So Oswald is not somebody who doesn't know the CIA. So here we are. If this thing unravels like we think it will, we have now a complete distrust in government.
Yes.
To a massive degree, people are going to start to cling to whatever they see as true, as right, as exhibiting courage. I felt a tremendous gravitational force to Trump over this. Trump gets up, he's defiant, he holds up his hand and his fist and says, fight, fight, fight. Almost like it was Teddy Kennedy, who takes a shot in the right shoulder while he's giving a speech. Theodore Roosevelt. And it's interesting that Theodore Roosevelt was a one-term president. He lost, and then on his re-election bid, he's in the Bull Moose Party, and he's giving a speech, and Theodore Roosevelt is shot right up here in the right upper kind of the subclavian region, and the blood is coming out in this white shirt. And he asks people, I want people to calm down. He goes, that's going to take more than that to kill a bull moose.
Well,
You can't, how much does that parallel what Trump did? It's unbelievable.
Agreed. And if we zoom out for just one moment, because you and I talked last time about the decline in people believing traditional media, and everything I'm doing with the Great Wake Up is meant to wake people up, literally.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like if you go back to what you said at the beginning, you're talking about the decline of Biden, and obviously Trump had headwinds, as you mentioned, doing well, and then this is clearly a botched assassination attempt, and we can detect the mendacity that's going on right here. How do you think this bodes for America and the world when we have such a schism between the people and the powers, I'll say the powers that shouldn't be? How does this proceed going forward?
I had a sense, and I can't completely justify it. I had a sense that this event could possibly unify the country. And there was such a divide. I haven't heard a single person say, wow, after this weekend, I really want to vote for President Biden. No one. People started to say, wait a minute, something very serious is going on. There is a dark side of this. And the dark side of it looks like it's on the side of Biden. You remember, he even utters the words that Trump has a bullseye on him. Elon Musk, I have, 1 million Twitter followers. Musk has 191 million. Musk says right away, I completely support Trump for the presidency. And people have thought, listen, he's kind of, globalist, he's Neuralink and Tesla, and, that maybe he's kind of in the middle. I think a lot of people were drawn around Trump at this point in time. Honestly, I think this was the defining moment. As a couple days before the convention, now today, Trump picks a pretty reasonable, straight up Vice President J.D. Vance. So there's no sugarcoating this. He didn't pick a token DEI person or some other politically motivated choice. He picked a pretty solid operational guy. He's well trained, well educated, reasonable. I quickly checked JD Vance because, a hot button issue for me, as you know, have been the COVID-19 vaccines. And this is early on when there was a lawsuit that went to the Ohio Supreme Court, and it was from Ohio State University. It was about their mandates. And Vance said, listen, I encourage people to take the vaccine. I took it, but it should never be mandated. And then he dug in later on and said, listen, this is experimental and we can't mandate it on people. We can never. It's got to be free choice. And so he really stuck with it. And so I don't know. I think things are looking pretty good for Trump right now. I'll say this much. Trump moves his head. He literally turns his head and then the bullet whizzes by and hits his ear. I can tell you the kid Crooks, he had Trump's head right in the crosshairs and Trump turned his head just enough, if millimeters away. If Crooks would have gotten the headshot, the bullet enters in the back, but when it comes out the front, it absolutely explodes the cranium. It's for sure going to be fatal. I think on Saturday, if Trump would have been shot dead, I think we potentially could have been thrown into anarchy, where, there are Trump supporters, and I wasn't one of them, but there are Trump supporters who I think would take up arms. I really do. I think that would have been the last straw. And then we see things unfold. Now there's all this commentary about potentially an inside job. Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, has called for an investigation. The intelligence community says they can't open the kid's cell phone in Quantico. And now we have, really just within a matter of hours of all this happening, Trump's case on documents has just been dropped and the judge has been declared ineligible as being a judge. Trump shows up in Milwaukee and he's got Vance as his vice president, and boy, does he have headwinds right now.
Agree. And I feel like something this coincidental, him turning his head, and like you said, I think it could have led to civil war, but it feels like almost divine intervention, something that is beyond that you just can't explain. But along those lines, I want to change questions and cover something regarding Trump. But to go back to our earlier interview, I want to go into something else. So in the debate, that disastrous debate that we talked about just ago, Trump claimed that there were 20 million illegals who have poured into the country under Biden's administration. Why do you think he didn't mention deporting all of them under his next administration?
Boy, wouldn't that be a task, right? So if there's 20 million truly illegals, people who aren't supposed to be here, can you imagine the task of finding them, physically rounding them up and deporting them? It turns out that there's roughly 250,000 to 300,000 deportations per year. So that was the number under Obama. It was the same number under Trump. In fact, Obama did a little better on deportations than Trump. So if Obama was terrible on the border, then Trump would have rustled up all the people that Obama let in, and Trump would have had a lot of deportations under his term. But he didn't. But let's give Trump credit for 1 million deportations, maybe 1.2 million. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine a 20-fold effort above that? In fact, no one who's been on the side of the border crisis and has given us a very big number on the border crisis, no one has mentioned rounding these people up and deportation. No one. I went to a dinner, Dan Patrick, who's our lieutenant governor in Texas. His number he had, I think, was at over 14 million. No mention of deportation, none. Someone was on Fox in the last couple of days. His number was 11 million. One of the things I would tell you on any type of crisis, when the numbers vary so much, that's a problem, right? I mean, there should be some agreed upon number, some roundabout number. The numbers of illegals that are being claimed coming to the United States range widely. They really range. It makes you wonder, what is the number? And of course, you and I have covered where are they and why aren't they visible and why aren't they in the labor statistics and why do the numbers kind of look the same? If you look at legal immigration, it looks about the same from the Obama administration through Trump and now and Biden. If it was open borders, you'd expect some type of signal. So I think you and I accept a border crisis, that there's always lots of commotion on the border, fentanyl trafficking, sex trafficking, crimes. If you go back to read Cormac McCarthy, he's one of my favorite authors about the border trilogy. Boy, there's been action on the border for centuries. There's always a border crisis, for sure. I mean, Trump had a border crisis because he tried to build the Trump border wall, and he got 400 miles of 2,000. If the border was perfectly controlled under Trump, there would be no need for a wall. So what we're pontificating is what we're being told, is it not true? And is there any way for us to verify what we're being told?
We're going back to the statistics, right? Going into the numbers.
U.S. Customs and Border Control, it is really a treasure trove of data. They have a lot of data over time, and it's relied upon. I'm preparing for this. I had sent you graph after graph after graph, and yeah, under Biden for sure, there is more activity. Mm-hmm. There's been some more activity on legal immigration. There's been some more activity on what's called encounters. Now, an encounter is, I think, the biggest number that people look at. And so an encounter, here's a story from the Pew Research Center. So it's Pew Research Center, should be pretty solid. Migrant encounters at the U.S.-Mexico border hit a record high at the end of 2023. And it says here, U.S. Border Patrol had nearly 250,000 encounters with migrants crossing into the United States from Mexico, according to government statistics. And they do show from 2000 down to a low during the Obama administration. During Obama, they had the lowest number of encounters. They had, under 50,000 encounters. I mean, they did way better than Bush. So under Bush, March of 2000, they had 220,000 encounters. That's George W. Bush. So Bush, and there's a lot of encounters right around the holidays every single year. So December and January are always high. And then they show it into the Trump years. And Trump, by the way, had a terrible month for encounters. In January 2018, he had 132,000 encounters. So he did, Obama did great on encounters. But this is the Pew Research Center. I don't know anybody on the right who would actually bring this up and kind of look through this. But here are the encounters. Encounters are defined as apprehensions, migrants that are taken into custody in the U.S., at least temporarily, to await a decision on whether or not they can remain in the country legally, such as being granted asylum. And then the second type of encounters is expulsions. Migrants are immediately expelled to their home country or last country of transit. They're carried out under Title 42 of the U.S. Code. Those are encounters. So encounters are actually kind of a good thing. These are people apprehended and those expelled. So, that's what we know right now. So the numbers are all over the place. People have said, well, large number of people have gone through. You and I have gone through the exercise of, can we see this? Can we actually see large numbers of people? And I have given you my rationale for, what I think is visible to us. I was also curious, in the last couple of weeks, I sent you a picture of just an emotionally devastated soccer player. And I believe it was Germany. And he said, I just can't take it anymore with all these illegal people pouring into Germany. And I do wonder how many people in America know that there's a border crisis in virtually every other country at the same time.
One,
I mean, you never hear it on US TV that there's a border crisis in Quebec or Germany or France or Sweden.
I never heard that till I met you when we met in last October in Alaska, and you mentioned it. With the exception of perhaps Tucker, he has mentioned that a little bit there. I have heard him talk about it on his show, but you're right, the mainstream media is not doing that. And I think because people are not thinking about it in those terms, that this could be, if it is a hoax or if there is something going on there, they're not thinking about it from a global standpoint, what this could mean. And with that said, I'll ask you this. You know, could this illegal situation, because I want to think about the end game here, right? With the illegal
Mhm.
immigrant situation, could it be used to drum up support, especially amongst conservatives who you would think would be against this, for more facial recognition technology, leading to digital and biometric IDs? I mean, is that the end game? I mean, is it to win elections? What could the end game be?
You could look at it where I think it's fairly clear that virtually everybody declaring and constantly bringing up this as an issue, constantly, is on the right. Virtually everyone's on the right. It's just like the border, just like the climate crisis. Virtually everybody bringing this up is on the left. Now, I'm going to use right and left because I don't think any of the other descriptors apply. So, for instance, we could say liberal for left. Wait a minute. Liberal? I mean, my body, my choice, but you have to be mandated to take a vaccine, and you don't have any choice about a vaccine. That's not very liberal. Do you see what I mean? So, censorship. The left was all for censorship in social media. Missouri versus Biden. So the word liberal doesn't apply. Civil liberties, libertarian, it doesn't apply. So I'm going to use the word left. Well, how about the right? You'd say, well, the right is conservative. Conservative. Take a look at the spending of the George W. Bush administration and the Trump administration. Conservative doesn't apply.
Yes,
I
you're
mean,
right.
we're talking about this is the time of the big spenders, completely fiscally irresponsible, completely irresponsible, wild spenders. There's nothing about that that's conservative. And then look at the stance on, let's say, the COVID vaccines. On the right, they wanted freedom, they wanted liberties, they wanted to be liberal.
Mhm.
Well, liberal typically isn't applied to the right. So I'm going to actually use right and left. I think if people started doing this, we'd actually know what we're talking about. But how can a problem like the border crisis be a right-wing problem, like almost exclusively? And then how can the climate crisis be almost exclusively a left-wing um, issue? Then how come us in the middle, Michael? How come we can't see either one? We can't see obvious evidence of either one. We're not overrun by migrants up and down the streets. We travel to cities all over the country. We're in hotels. We can't see this crisis. We also can't see the climate crisis. I mean, almost every day it looks like kind of the same day as it was yesterday, as like last year. We can't see it. But what we're told is that there's subtleties. On the climate crisis, we're told, you know what, it is getting hotter, you just can't notice it, or there are more hurricanes, and that must be related to the climate crisis. I listened to NPR radio recently, and they said the reason why the water is rising in Venice is because of the climate crisis. Well, that must be the explanation, as if the water has never risen in Venice before. On the border crisis, we're told, listen, it's around there. You just can't see it because people are in, secret planes and secret buses. They're given free credit cards. They're lounging around in hotels for years and years and years. And they're not working because we don't see them in the labor statistics at all. They're not showing up in any educational statistics. There just isn't anything where you can point that there are more bodies around to do something, except, now this is very, very interesting, except to vote. Some people have said all these illegals are here so they can vote for Biden. Now, is there any credibility to this? This is very interesting. Recently, several, more Republican-dominated states have tried to put into law that you can't vote without showing some proof of citizenship. And now the U.S. House of Representatives put forward legislation for this. And guess what? The Democrats are against it. This is very interesting. Why would anybody be against proof of citizenship to vote?
Well, I know the case that they would make. The case that they make is that it's disenfranchising people, right? That's what they profess that is going on. But I think that you and I can see that something different is going on here.
Well, I mean, you need proof of citizenship for all kinds of entry into the Social Security system. If they're thinking about, seniors in nursing homes, they've had to use their proof of citizenship, whether they have a birth certificate or a passport, what have you, for all these other steps in life. Why would it not be required? I find this very interesting. Why would the Democrats be so strongly opposed to this? In fact, how could any Democrat support an illegal immigrant, someone who's not supposed to be here, voting? Maybe the right is they've smelled this out correctly. Maybe this big importation of people is carefully concealed, but it's poised to vote Democratic. I mean, you can't make this up. I mean, you really can't. If I honestly thought that right-wing quote conspiracy that all the illegals are here to vote for Biden, I really thought that was bluster. I thought there was, but when now the Democrats are showing massive resistance to any type of voter ID or proof of citizenship, I'm really starting to get suspicious. I'm really starting to wonder, am I missing something here?
Right. I mean, that's been called the replacement theory. And they did the same thing, in 2020. There was those cases in Georgia. I think they moved the baseball game, or I think it was the World Series, over this. But when I think about what you're talking about, and we go back to whether it's climate change, whether it's the border crisis, if we just stop and think about this, if this were a movie or a TV show that we were watching, I think we'd have to step back and think about how clever the people are that enable widespread adoption of these ideas. Because going back to what you said before, we can't necessarily see climate change occurring, and then when we talk about last time, you're saying that we can't see all of these migrant camps that should be there if there are this many illegals in the country. But what they're doing, I think I mentioned this to you on a phone call recently, it sounds like a Twilight Zone episode. They're getting you to discount your own senses, right? Your own ears, your own eyes, right? And so now here we are going after these invisible enemies, much like COVID, right? You can't trust what you see and hear around you. You got to trust the people in power. You got to trust the authorities. And what they're masters of doing, and even this goes back to the assassination attempt, they're masters at controlling the narrative in such a way that we get locked down into our competing camps. You got the left here, you got the right here, and never the twain shall meet. Meanwhile, you got algorithms that cater more information to your side, whatever side you are. But I am hopeful that in interviews like this, and even all of the craziness and the tragedy, I mean, of course, the tragedy could have been much worse on Saturday. With all of that, my hope is that we begin as people in the middle, or people that just can see through this, to really recognize what's been going on.
Well, here's the thing. I'm glad you asked that question about deportation. Because if the border crisis is real at the magnitude that people are talking about, let's just say we're at the magnitude that Trump says, 20 million illegals here. If Trump gets into office and he goes, "Oh, I've solved it, border crisis solved," the comeback question is, well, where are the 20 million deportations? That's going to be hard to show.
Yeah.
Why don't you show us that one? Because it's about 1 million a year. If you want to get it done in a year, that'll be 20 million in a year. If you want to get it done over 4 years, it's still 5 million a year. It's 5 times the number of deportations to, quote, solve the border crisis. So, yeah, and I find it fascinating that no one has brought up deportations. I've listened to tons of right-wing media and, oh, the border crisis, the border crisis. Everyone throws their hands up. Oh, it's terrible. We're being invaded and all these terrible people. No one has talked about the hard work
Mhm.
of finding these people that you and I can't see. I've been all over the country. I can't see them, but someone's got to find them if they exist, and they have to be deported. No one on the right wing has mentioned that. I just think it's real interesting. There's another interesting thing that came up. Another controversy I think we discussed was the Russian-Ukraine war. Have you seen that development recently? That's been very interesting. So, people have been questioning, how can there be a war in Ukraine, but there's no embedded reporting. There's no report of where the battle lines are. Normally when there's a war, there's just daily reporting. They have the correspondents, BBC, CNN Global. They're there. You can see the prisoner exchanges, towns being captured, people, dead on the street, humanitarian crises. I mean, this has gone on for years now. We really haven't seen that. Every so often, we're shown some token picture of a burned out building. Right? One time, I saw some reel where I saw one little tank by itself, and someone said, "Oh, here, look at this! Got taken out by some drone or something," but nothing impressive. Now, the other day, and we're told, nearly $100 billion has gone to the, quote, war in Ukraine. But through this entire period of time, we haven't seen any changes in the Ukrainian fighting force, no pictures of new tanks or planes. Then other people said, well, it's just been embezzled by the Ukrainians. And I said, well, listen, at that level, Zelensky and his friends are out of there. They're going to be, in the Caymans somewhere. No evidence of that. They haven't built, Disney Ukraine. I mean, where do you hide $100 million? I mean, that's a lot of money. And then, sure enough, there was like some real conflict. I think a Russian missile hit something in Kiev.
Mhm.
And then there was the most interesting announcement. It said NATO is going to authorize Ukraine to use 15 US F-16s. And the subtitle was, "Now the real war begins." And I thought to myself, what? So there was no real war. This was kind of a slow-moving Russian annexation without too much military involvement. Now something has happened, and suddenly NATO's got the US F-16s.
Mhm.
And again, the mainstream media has not picked up on this. So, like the real war is going to begin. Like now there's going to be some real conflict. What Americans want to know, and what I want to know is how much real conflict has gone on over there? Where is the money being spent? Where is the progress? Who controls what territories?
Yeah.
And certainly, how is it going to come to an end? What type of diplomacy are we seeing over there? The other evidence that we really don't have anything going on is we don't see any diplomacy. We're not seeing any talks in Budapest or in Zurich. Or, I mean, normally when there is a big time conflict, there is just a series of diplomatic talks that are highly visible. We get through the G7 and we got through the NATO meetings, and people are shaking hands and they're drinking tea, and there doesn't appear to be any diplomacy or interest in ending a war in Ukraine, as if a war really doesn't exist.
Well, it reminds me of 1984, where they said, we've always been at war with Oceania. I think of that. And then I also think of this. I heard some comedians saying that he was really happy that we were at war, or that, sorry, that we're in a proxy war with Ukraine because it ended COVID. And if you think about the power brokers that are controlling our media and the narrative, isn't it interesting that all of our attention was on COVID? If we go back to 2022,
Yeah.
that was what everyone was talking about. And then suddenly, boom, we're onto this. And it drove me crazy. If I remember how I felt back in 2022, everyone is obsessed with COVID. And then boom, everyone is obsessed with Ukraine, and they put up their, flags and things like that, and you got the yellow and blue flags, and now we're just talking about this. We're on to the next thing. And I follow this other commentator who talks about this, talks about the dwindling attention spans. It's not even a 24-hour news cycle anymore. It's like a 1-second news cycle, right? And it makes me wonder, like you said, what has been going on? We have all these phones in our back pocket right now. How come we haven't had any of this video footage of the war, of the battles in Ukraine?
Yeah.
But
Oh, that's
and
a good point. So the bullet hits, whizzes past Trump's ear, and we have massive video documentation of everything. And you have all these Ukrainians, and we have no video documentation across all the cities in the Donetsk region. There's all these regions. There's no voluminous footage of what's going on over there. I mean, what we saw was people on Twitter, they put a Ukrainian flag as an emoji. And then when the House of Representatives votes for more money to go to Ukraine, they're waving Ukrainian flags. They're waving them almost like fanatically. It was crazy. I went to the Parliament in the UK last year, and I'll never forget. We got there, and the person escorting us pointed out that every single Union Jack outside of the Parliament building was replaced with a Ukrainian flag. Why? I mean, why is that the case? So there's something going on. I think the common threads are keeping us uneasy, conflicts that we can't see, no embedded reporting, this archetypal fear that, we're going to be scorched with global warming, the oceans will rise and we'll be drowning. Or how about this? We're being invaded. We're being invaded by a virus, COVID or monkeypox or bird flu, or we're being invaded by illegal immigrants, people who want to kill us. We're being invaded. I mean, this is archetypal fear. You can tell by looking at me and my name, I'm Irish through and through. Let me tell you what, the Irish lived in fear for centuries because they were invaded and raided by the Vikings, who are a lot stronger than we were. They used to clobber the Irish when they would raid the island of Ireland. It's an archetypal fear that we're being invaded. And I think that's the reason why this soccer player in Germany couldn't take any more. His hands are in his head. He said, I can't take any more illegal. It is, Michael, it's a psyop to some degree. It's a psychological operation that's very successful.
yes, I don't disagree with that. I'm gonna lean on a different question here. So, moving on to the health situation. So I've heard reports that bad actors wish to infect our poultry with bird flu, leading to another vaccine cure. Only this time, speaking of fear, our poultry and thereby the food supply would contain the vaccine, giving it to people who ingest it. Is this a possibility? And if so, how do we counter it?
It is, this is going to have to be the last question because I'm going to have to move on
Sure.
after this. But let me say that people are worried. People are looking up in the sky and wonder if they're being sprayed with something. The USDA on their website has an experiment after experiment where they're trying to get messenger RNA, this code for foreign proteins, to be absorbed across the GI tract. There's even a startup company in China, Zhang and colleagues published, they got a small segment of the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein messenger RNA to be absorbed in the mammalian GI tract in rabbits. But it looks like it's been done in humans, at least in watermelon juice. People are wondering, could there be vaccines in our food? That's another archetypal fear. Are we being poisoned?
Do you want to save it for next time? Because there's so many more things that we have to cover, and I know
We have so much. I think the assassination attempt on Trump and sadly the murder of an innocent man, injury of 2 women have just preoccupied us. Why don't we come back and we'll have another one? This is so interesting, and of course we're generating interesting convo with your followers out there on your Substack. It's really been fun to follow, and I think people say, well, what are you trying to accomplish? I think we're trying to accomplish some sense of a voice of reason, some sanity here, that we recognize there are things that making us uncomfortable. All of us get uncomfortable. But there probably is a middle ground of sanity, to recognize that people are concerned, but maybe things are not to such a degree to invoke some big change. I mean, in Finland, the concern right now is bird flu is so bad that people are taking bird flu vaccines. That's been proposed for the United States. It was previously proposed for monkeypox. If 20 million illegals are here, and maybe they will vote for Biden, maybe Biden will win anyway. Maybe these concerns are legitimate. We're going to shake them out. I predict that all of these controversies that we talked about, I think there's a degree of exaggeration. And our real goal is to figure out what is the degree of exaggeration on all of them, and how do we get to this center point where we have a clear vision. We'll have to leave it here, Michael. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Good cliffhanger. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.